love the idea of making your own Christmas crafts and projects but you don't know where to start, this video is for you. I created this step-by-step tutorial that's beginner friendly, that also has lots of options to accommodate for all kinds of skill levels and gives you ideas for things you can put on your Christmas cards, gift tags, or even potentially gift wrap if you have the right kind of paper. The way I would recommend using this video is grab your supplies right now and follow along with me, do each step with me as we go, pausing as you need to, and then when you're finished and you've practiced each of these elements, you can decide where and what you want to use them for. Throughout the video, I'll give you lots of inspirations and ideas for things you can do with them. So for materials, I've designed this video in a way where pretty much any medium can work. Whatever you're most comfortable with, you can make work with these designs. It will be probably easiest to follow along this video using gouache or watercolor because I'm going to be using my dried gouache palette, but some other mediums I think would work really well are good quality watercolor or acrylic gouache, even just regular acrylic if that's what you have on hand. Anything that's layerable is going to be good for this project. For colors, you're going to need red, green, yellow, and brown. And you're probably going to want some variety within those colors. So that may just look like mixing in white, or you might have a variety of shades of each of those colors coming out of the tube. But I would just say before you start, make sure you like the color palette that your red, green, and yellow create together. For paintbrushes, I would just make sure you have a nice variety of brushes and definitely have some on hand that have a really nice thin tip, because that is how I end up being able to get a lot of the details that come through in these designs. I'm starting out by swatching a variety of the colors I have in my palette on the side of the page so I can refer back to them and decide which colors I want to use for where. It's also kind of a nice way to fill out part of a sketchbook page. If you're working in a sketchbook, it kind of like brings the whole thing together when you can see all the colors that are going to be used in the final piece. A lot of what I'm going to be doing in this video is freehand, although there will be some times where I will guide you to draw in something with pencil first because it will be helpful, but you can also at any point, if you would like to, trace out your shapes ahead of time. There's no reason not to if you think that will help you. With these circles, it doesn't have to be perfect, just nice and loose, really, really light. If they end up being darker than you want or you're worried it's going to show through, just use a kneadable eraser to pick up some of the graphite before you start painting. In addition to pre-swatching your colors on your page or somewhere else nearby, I really like to have like a sample sheet as I'm going along, because sometimes I forget what color is what and I just want to be able to quickly check, wait, which shade of green in my palette was which, and so I can quickly put it on my little sheet of sample paper just to double check. You can use a pretty small pointed brush for the entirety of these wreaths. I'm using my number 3 brush with a nice like pointed tip. So you want to start by just going around your circle with a kind of mid-toned, light-colored green. You want to make sure you have another green that is darker and can be layered on top, whether it's because it's watered down or you're going to use a darker shade. And make like a variety of pointed leaves, and make sure that the leaves are going in the same direction around the wreath, or it might kind of look a little weird in the end. But other than that, don't stress about making all of the leaves look perfect and evenly shaped. I find these kind of things look nicer in the end if things look a little bit more hand painted and natural, so don't stress about it being perfect. You don't have to pair the leaves together the same way every time. I'm trying to create some variety so it looks more natural. I'm also going to show you a similar but slightly different way that you could paint a wreath. You can just choose which one you like better. So this one has a visible vine going all the way through it, so you're going to end up using like a thin brush to create the kind of main line of the wreath, and then the leaves are going to kind of shoot out off from it, and it ends up being a little bit less foliage, a little bit more sparse looking than the one above. So same as before, I am making those pointed teardrop almost kind of shaped leaves and making sure that as I'm going around the circle, they're protruding off of the vine of the wreath, going in different directions but generally heading in the same direction around. I started painting backwards in the direction from where the wreath was going just because that's what felt more comfortable for my hand, and while painting this I can't like turn my sketchbook around, but I encourage you, if you're not filming yourself doing it, to do that as much as you need to make it easier, more comfortable for you to paint. Once your first layer is dry, you're going to go back in with the darker shade of green and start adding in more of the same shaped leaves over top. You can layer these on top of each other. What we're creating with the 2 layers is that some of the leaves are going to contrast and stick out against each other, but they don't all have to. So going back in and adding more of those shapes, you can see sometimes I kind of hide them like they're behind the leaves I've already painted in, so I only paint like the top half of a leaf, but you can kind of pick and choose when you do this as you like, or depending on your skill level, you can also just completely layer these ones on top. The key to this is just making the leaves look really like organic and just getting that general same shape over and over again. Again, making sure you have a really thin brush so we can get these really fine stems of the leaves. You're gonna go in, and the key with this wreath to make it look different from the first one is that you've got those little stems and the leaves are more sparse. You're not gonna fill them out as we did in the first one. It also, I find, looks really nice to not always every time make the same kind of shape of leaf. You can if you feel more comfortable doing that, but you can see there's some leaves where I made kind of almost just like a flattened out shape instead, and it gives it a little bit more of that natural botanical look. But just continuing to go around the circle, adding more of the dark colored leaves for contrast. And I'm also adding in some little spots with just little stems poking out that I will eventually put the little berries on. Once that's completely dry, because you definitely don't want red bleeding into green, we can go in and do the berries just with a little brush, just little tiny circles, kind of sporadically wherever you like. I find it generally looks good to do little groups of 3 if you're not really sure where to put them. Little trios of little triangles tend to look good. You can make them as big or small as you want, play around with it. I do recommend like trying this a few times and picking your own like stylistic choices of how you want to paint these things. For this more botanical looking wreath, as I'm calling it, I am sometimes putting the berries like nestled in between the leaves and then sometimes putting them on the end where I've created those little branch off points. You can kind of pick and choose. It's kind of just ultimately up to your eye. Like when you're done, do you feel like it's got enough balance of green and red? Do you think that there's any spots that need a few more berries? I can see a spot on the top right of the top wreath where I wish I had put more berries. I think these wreaths would be really cute if you're gonna make your own greeting cards or gift tags to put text inside of them, so you could make it big enough to fit like a to so-and-so from so-and-so, or it could say Merry Christmas inside or whatever you want your sentiment to be. Or you could easily turn the way that we've painted the wreath greenery into just like a long strip, so it could decorate the top or bottom of a sketchbook page or a greeting card or a tag or whatever. Next, we'll do some gift bows. These are just cute to add to pretty much anything. You could put them on top of a wreath, you could put them on top of a tree. Just having some cute little bow shapes in your painting repertoire to put on things is always fun. So start with either a washed out or light shade of whatever color you want to use here. I'm going to do a red one and a yellow one in 2 different bow shapes, but we're just going for the general blob shape of the bow first, and then we're going to add in shades and details afterwards. So I've just kind of generally got the shape of a bow in my mind and gonna add the ribbon coming out the bottom as well. If you're not as confident with freehanding shapes, this would be a good thing to trace out first. Just like Google image search a gift bow and trace it out first, and then fill in your shape over top. You can of course use whatever color you like for a bow, but make sure that whatever you're doing as the base color is something that's either nice and light and you have a good color to layer on top of, or it's really watered down so you can use the concentrated version of that color to add the details later. So once it's totally dry, I'm coming back in to carve out kind of the main shapes in the bow. This bottom one, the ribbons ended up kind of overlapping with each other, which I didn't like very much, but I just kind of made do with the shape that I had. So I'm just using my teeny tiny brush with a darker version of that red to carve out like where that center of the bow is gonna sit, the little creases in the bow. And I also made a little shadow where the layers of the ribbon would go on top of each other, and you can see kind of a little shadow underneath. With like a darker shade of brownish yellow, I'm going in over top and again kind of carving out where the shadows would be on the bow, so like underneath where the ribbons overlap, carving out that center place where it ties, and then also accenting where it would be shaded underneath where the main part of the ribbon would be. Next, let's do some cute little Christmas trees. I really like my trees to kind of have this mixed look between a more realistic looking tree versus a cartoony one. So I'll show you my method for painting trees that kind of gets this effect. So I'm gonna start by drawing out triangles just to make sure as I'm painting the layers of the tree that I generally am going in the right direction. It's easy to make a tree kind of wonky and misshapen if you don't have something to follow. But again, it's just super light and I'm gonna use an eraser to get rid of anything that I don't want showing through. I'm gonna test out what colors I want because I want 2 contrasting shades of green. It doesn't even really matter what. This is what I love about working with green is by the end, any shades of green together usually end up looking good because in nature we just see so many shades of green. That's my theory anyways. So in the bottom, about roughly to 1/3 or 1/4 of my triangle, I'm starting with kind of like a mid-toned green and starting from the center, shooting out to the side and making these branch kind of shapes outward, trying to keep it kind of symmetrical on both sides, but also not overthinking it because the more random it looks, the more natural it's gonna look. In between each of these layers of the tree, I used my heat gun to make sure it was completely dry because I like the look of the high contrast layers between the tree. You could go with the same colors all the way up, you just won't have as like definitive of a look of the branches of the tree coming out at each layer, but that's totally up to you. If you are going to go for different colors, do make sure you dry your layers in between. Otherwise, you're going to just have the colors blending together and then you lose that definition of the branches. I did a second tree so I can show you another example of what the branching variation can look like, and with this one I start with the lighter color as the bottom layer and then do the darker color on top so you can see 2 different ways that you can do the tree with slightly different shades of green, and also so you can see what it looks like if we just leave it as the tree versus what it looks like if we put a trunk at the bottom. So since I'm just freehanding it and using gouache, I'm just using like a mix of different browns, so it's not just a blocked solid brown, so it looks a little bit more like a realistic tree trunk. If I hadn't freehanded this, I wish I had done it a little bit narrower, but I think it still works out in the end. I kind of just keep reshaping and making the tree trunk into a shape that corresponds with the shape of the tree, although yeah, it is a little bit wide for what I would have ideally liked to have done. You can always get creative with what you put at the top of your tree. I love a star on top of a tree, so I'll show you 2 different ways to do it. For the first one, it's just going to be like a basic star, but for the second one, I'm going to make it have kind of like a natural glow. Stars can be a tricky shape to freehand symmetrically and not make look super wonky if you haven't had a lot of practice with them, so don't hesitate to draw one out first in pencil if you need to. For a really simple way to give your star like a natural glow behind it, start with a really watered down, a really light shade of yellow, and you can just make a circle, and then once it's dry, just go in over top and make the star on top of that, and then it just gives the star that little bit of a radiant glow. You can of course just leave your trees undecorated and plain if you so choose. You don't even have to put a star on top if you don't want, but here are some cute easy things you can do to trim your trees. So the first one is just to do little loops of garland. These can be tricky to do depending on your skill level. You might want to just grab like a white gel pen or white paint marker to do these, especially if you're working on something like watercolor. It's going to be hard to get an opaque enough color to do this on top, so don't be afraid to grab another medium to help you with this. But with gouache, if you feel comfortable with a really fine tipped brush, you can trace out these shapes of the garland like I'm doing. I like the way that when you do it with paint, it kind of like you get more concentrated deposits of pigment in different spots and gives it that more painterly look. The way I decorate this tree is a little bit more beginner friendly. It's basically just covering it in little snowflakes and pieces of snow. So you can, if depending on your skill level, grab like a paint marker, a gel pen, or even potentially a colored pencil, depending on what medium you're using to add these little shapes in if you don't feel comfortable making tiny little shapes with a brush. I know I didn't really even feel super comfortable doing that until recently, but yeah, just making little snowflake shapes sporadically all over the tree so it kind of looks like it's just outside and got snowed on, and then filling in between little dots of snowflakes to fill out the shape of the tree. I really like the way the look of this one came out, but alternatively, if you're looking for a little bit more of like a traditional looking tree, you could do ornaments that are just little circle dots all over the tree, probably a little bigger than the berries we did for the wreaths, but just ornaments sporadically sprinkled all over the tree in red and green would look good at this palette that we're already working with. I think that these trees would look very cute on a Christmas card. You could write Merry Christmas at the top or bottom. You can kind of curve the text around the top and bottom would look really cute. They would also make cute decorations for the bottom of like a gift tag or painting on a Christmas gift. Really, whatever you choose to do with them. These are kind of just so traditionally Christmas, you could kind of do anything with them. Next up, we'll do some holly leaves. You can kind of shape these in whatever way that you want so they can look really good to fill up a corner. They can even be kind of like the center focal point of your piece, but they're kind of good for all sorts of things. The tricky thing is that the shapes of the leaves can be a little bit difficult, so I do definitely recommend tracing out something first. You can see that here I have gone in and done really light pencil shapes of roughly where I want the leaves to be. I've kind of done two different options of ways they can be laid out just to give you an idea of how you could lay yours out. One thing that I do want to stress if you're working with a water-based medium like watercolor or gouache is that if you go and do the outlines of the leaves first and then come back in and fill in the center, you'll often be able to kind of see the outside of the leaf, which is not necessarily the look that you probably want. So as you can see, I'm trying to kind of trace it as I'm going, and that's why having that pencil shape of the leaf underneath is helpful so that I'm not drawing out the leaf and then that starts to dry, and then as you go to fill it in, it's harder to make that blend. Even the one I'm doing right now, right here, you can kind of see that the outside of the leaf is kind of visible, which doesn't necessarily look that great. I used to find painting holly leaves really hard. Honestly, they're still kind of challenging. I'm never like 100% happy with what they look like. They are just really cute and fun to add to Christmas stuff. But the way that I think of them is that it's just the shape of really any other leaf, but it's like it's got little bites taken out of the side. So that's why I started with the outline being like a regular leaf shape, and then I just kind of make the cutouts to make it look like holly. You can also kind of like take the regular leaf shape and add kind of more jagged edges to it, and it will also look like holly. But before you commit to painting this on anything, definitely play around with it, do some tests, see what layouts and shapes you like the leaves to be, follow some other reference images and see what you like the most. Same guidance as before with adding the berries. Since we're doing red on top of green, make sure it's totally dry so you don't get a murky brown. But I'm starting with in this case, I actually started with a darker shade of red and then added some lighter red on top to give some like more dimension to the berries. Depending on your medium, you might not be able to do that. Gouache is layerable like that. If you're working with watercolor, start with the lighter color first and then do darker color on top and wait for layers to dry in between. With the leaf details, you can again use another medium that's a little bit more user-friendly like a marker or a colored pencil to add the leaf details if you want. I'm using my brush, and you can also play around with whether you want the lines on the leaves to be all darker or some lighter. Sometimes it's fun to play around with adding like a highlight by making some of the lines on the leaves light versus dark, so you can play around with that. The next thing that we'll paint is a string of Christmas lights, and these can be really cute as like a border on the edge of a page, whether it is a greeting card, or I did these as like a border for a invitation to a Christmas party once. So you can either do like just a strip on the top and bottom or a whole square of the border all the way around, or even just the way I've done it here, kind of filling out space if you're doing something on a sketchbook or you've created some kind of design that you need some kind of Christmassy filler. Depending on your comfort and skill level, you might want to trace out where the string lights are going to go. I just did this freehand, which is a little bit tricky to do, especially with a brush rather than something like a marker or a pen tip. So choose what works best for you. I like the look of the brush, even though it doesn't come out perfectly at all times. It's easy to go back in and touch it up later on. And plus we're going to be adding the little attachments for the lights, which really help to cover up any spots that have imperfections. So the shape that I'm making to put in the spots where I'm going to eventually put the bulbs, it's basically just like a square, but that's kind of tapered in at one side. In some spots it gets a little bit more triangular, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Again, I feel like with painted stuff, the little imperfections are what give it charm and make it look cute and fun and personal, so don't stress about it being perfect. Any of these paintings, or anything you paint in general, just let it have your own personal touch and flair, and don't stress about it being perfect. The whole point behind everything on these pages is that they're things that are relatively easy to paint and still look cute even if they're not quote-unquote perfect. The way that I chose to shape the bulbs is kind of more of like a teardrop shape, but there are other options. You could just make them round circles. If that shape intimidates you, you can make them more oval shaped. There's lots of potential approaches, but I also, for colors, just went with some that I had already been using in other places on this page, just because it kind of helps everything look cohesive and bring everything together. But you can do whatever you want for Christmas lights. That's the fun part about them. Next we'll do a mistletoe branch. This would be really cute if you're making a Christmas card for your sweetheart, or it's just like a cute Christmassy thing that would look really cute if you're making like a gift tag and it's hanging down from the top, or even just using this type of greenery just to decorate like corners and edges of pages looks really nice. You can take the way that we're going to paint these leaves and turn them into like little corner accents or something. The key to the shape of these leaves is that it's kind of like an elongated teardrop that tips to one side. So I'm making like a long, narrow line, and then when it gets to the bottom, it curves out and makes almost like a J or a backwards J, and then kind of just rounding out and filling out the shape to get the shape of the leaf. Since I'm doing it freehand, I just started by making a couple of branches, building the leaves off, and then kind of stepping back and looking at it for a moment and deciding where else leaves were needed. But you can draw it in ahead of time if you want to make sure that you're happy with the layout of the leaves before you go in. If you're working with something like acrylic or acrylic gouache, you may want to just make all of this flat and not worry about getting any dimensions in the colors, which will look good regardless. But if you are working with a water-based medium, what I was kind of doing here is using more and more watered down of the shade of green that I had as I was going along, just to give it a little bit of like interest and variety in the shapes of the leaves, but that's something you don't necessarily have to do if that overwhelms you at all. I decided to go with a brown stem at the top. It ended up being a little thicker than I wanted it to, but the bow covers it up anyways. It's up to you though whether you'd want to do like a brown stem, or you can have it just kind of be like the ends of the green branches sprouting out. And then again, it needs to be completely dry. We can do a bow on top if you kind of want to bring it all together. A lot of the time when you see images of mistletoe, it's usually tied up with a cute little ribbon. So I just did a really, really basic bow shape. Or if you want to get fancy, you can do the kinds of bows that we did earlier in this video. I'm always looking for an excuse to put flowers all over everything, so we're going to do the classic Christmas flower, a poinsettia. There are going to be some really basic versions of what you can do with them, just kind of giving you guidance of how to paint them in a nice, easy way, and then you can choose how many leaves you want to put in, whether you want to put, how many petals you want to put in, and then you can choose whether to put leaves behind, all that good stuff. So just really basic shape. We're going to start with, I made kind of like a triangle with lines just to give my eyes like a guide of where I was going to end up putting the main petals, and this is going to be the base layer, so I'm doing like a washed out light version of the color that I'm using, because later I'm going to be using like a deeper, fuller version of that color. So if you're using a water-based medium, it can just be a watered down version of your color, and then for the next layer, it's going to be the full opaque version of the color. If you're using acrylic, you'll want to use like a lighter shade or a shade mixed with white, and then the darker shade on top. So these poinsettias are going to have 6 petals, so these are the bottom 3 petals. I'm going to be doing the other 3 over top. So you can choose how many you're going to put on the bottom layer and do that many in this lighter color. Then when that's totally dry, you're going to go in with the more opaque version of your color to add the top layer of the petals. You want to try and generally keep the petal shape relatively consistent, but it doesn't have to be perfect. If you want to try something a little more advanced, or you want your poinsettias to look a little bit more complex, you could do a 3rd layer, like have 3 different shades of the red that you're going to work with, and start with like a bottom layer of petals and then do a middle layer and then a top layer, getting darker with each layer as you go. Or if you're using acrylic or gouache, you can use the lighter layers on top because it's more opaque and you can get the layering that way, but I still find it easier to go light to dark with something like this. Then we're going to add in details. So the key to making sure that the details are visible is just picking a color that has enough contrast. So I've taken my red and mixed it with white so it pops out enough that you can see the little indents on top of the petals. Now again, like I was saying before with the holly, you can experiment with whether your color is going to be light or dark to represent like a highlight in the creases or a shadow in the creases. I ended up doing light for the darker petals and dark for the lighter petals. So it just kind of gives it a stylized look to do it this way, but you can experiment with trying to make it look more accurate with what your reference photo looks like if you're going to be looking at a reference photo while you're doing these. And then I like to do the centers by just taking like a nice warm yellow and just doing lots of little dots. If you look closely at a poinsettia, that's generally what they look like in the center. So you can play around with the size, how many you put. There's lots of options, but this is how I like to do them. And last but not least, we're gonna do probably my favorite thing to paint because it's just so easy and there's so much room to do cute, fun things with them. So I'm gonna do a little set of mock gingerbread that's in different shapes. The reason why it's so fun and easy is because you just have to start with a basic brown to paint out your blocks of shapes. To get this shade of brown, I'm just using a mix of mostly burnt sienna with a little bit of sepia. I find it gives the perfect gingerbread color. So I'm just gonna block out a bunch of basic shapes that you typically could imagine seeing in the shape of a gingerbread and that can be decorated in a way that is kind of reminiscent of the real thing it's mimicking, but also kind of how it would be decorated if it were a cookie. So I start with the little house shape and then I'll show you how I paint a gingerbread man in a really simple blocked out way so that if you want to trace it out first you can, but this is a way to do it without needing to do that. Keep in mind if you're following this technique, you need to move quickly, otherwise you're going to end up with lines in your paint that you don't necessarily want. So I start with an oval for the head, and then to make his arms, it's kind of like an elongated jelly bean shape, and I'm making sure that as I'm going that the arms are kind of equally jutting out from either side of his head, just kind of adding more paint to even it out and make it symmetrical where I need to. Then underneath his arms, it's basically like just a little box, like a straight down line. It can kind of go out to the side a little bit, but it's basically just more like a rectangle, actually, is probably more accurate. And then for his feet, I'm again kind of just mimicking the same shape that I did to make his arms. So I'm kind of carving out the same shape that I did to match his arm, just like lower underneath. But then you want to make sure that you leave a little divot right in the center for where his feet would meet. And then you kind of have a basic gingerbread shape. If you're really at a beginner level and you don't want to do anything too complicated, you can do really simple shapes like hearts and circles, and it's really easy to go in with a pen or a paint marker to make them look like gingerbread cookies. So you can do as simple of a shape as you need to feel like you can handle it with your skill level. I'll show you an example of how you could decorate each of these gingerbread items, but the really fun thing about these is you can look up reference images of gingerbread cookies and get ideas of what you want to do. It's really fun to just paint a big batch of a bunch of these shapes and then look at some reference images and try and decide different things to put on each one. Maybe you do a set of Christmas cards and each has like a different set of cookies with designs on it, or you're doing gift tags and there's little gingerbreads at the bottom. So many options, so many things you can do. So I definitely recommend, if you want to, the first time you go through this video, just follow along with what I'm doing, but there's lots of great images and ideas out there of how you can decorate gingerbread. As I've mentioned a couple times before in this video, it can be really challenging to do these really detailed small things, even if you have a really nice narrow paintbrush. It's taken me a lot of practice to get really good at just using the very tip of my round brush to make little details. So don't fret if you're not quite ready for that yet. Definitely grab some kind of paint marker or colored pencil to do these details, and then work your way up, or practice a bunch of times before you do anything that is going to be like the final piece. Since for me, I was filling out a sketchbook spread, I decided to do one more little string of festive lights just to fill out the bottom of the page. And then I also went back through and added little versions of the things that I painted throughout this page, and some extra like stars and sparkles and stuff like that to fill out my sketchbook spread. If you're also doing a sketchbook spread and you also want to go back in and fill out some little missing spots, some of my tips to make sure your sketchbook spread looks nice and cohesive and something that's fun to look back at after is that it's got elements that kind of match in different places across the page. So when you see the full spread, you can see I've done like little stars that match all across the page. I pull colors from different spots into other spots so that everything is kind of all brought together. And you can also use these tools for when you're doing these little elements on gift tags and cards and stuff like that. Little extra sparkles and stuff like that are really useful for helping to kind of bring the whole composition of a piece together. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you're still here, leaving a like on the video really helps. This was my first time doing a tutorial in this style, and I would really love your feedback. Did you feel like it was paced well? Was it helpful? Was it inspiring in the way that I hoped it was? Please let me know in the comments if you want to see more like this, and if so, what you would want me to demonstrate in future videos of this style. If you'd like to be the first to know when those videos come out, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. And lastly, if you'd like to stay in touch in between videos, I post most regularly on Instagram and Patreon, so you can find links to those below. I hope you have the warmest and coziest holiday season, and I will see you in the next video.